Alrighty, we are good to go. Take it away.
Hi everyone, welcome to the class. I'm really excited to see all of you. My name is Elise Tolles. I'm a polymer clay artist and jewelry designer. My brand is Elysian Theory, and you can find me, they're gonna put it in the chat, but you can find me at elysiantheory.com and Elysian Theory on Instagram. And just so everybody knows, the class is being recorded. So if you want to go back and rewatch anything, you'll be able to on the Michael's YouTube channel. So it should be up within the next day or two on the YouTube channel. And if you have the materials to work alongside me while I'm doing the project, that's great. But if you don't, that's fine as well. You can just kind of hang out and watch. And if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat, and I might be able to answer some of those as we go along through the process. Yeah, so I have been working with polymer clay for about 5 years. So it's coming up on right about 5 years. And I fell in love with it pretty much right away as soon as I started working with it. I just think it's a great medium. I'm really passionate about it. In case you don't really know about polymer clay, or this is your first time working with it, polymer clay, it's not actually a clay. So calling it clay is a little bit of a misnomer. It's not like, an earthen clay. It's not made from anything like that. It's actually a type of moldable vinyl. So it is a plastic-based material that you can mold, and then it cures with heat. So when it's exposed to heat in the oven, the molecules kind of cure, and then it's hardened permanently. So in its raw state, it's a moldable material, and it doesn't have any water in it. It's polymer based, so it won't dry out over time, which is great. And some of my favorite things about polymer clay are, one, it's really accessible. So you can go into Michael's anywhere around the country and buy polymer clay. You don't need any special tools or equipment to work with it. You pretty much just need the clay itself and a work surface and your home oven. So you don't need a special kiln or anything like that. You can cook polymer clay in any oven. You can use your kitchen oven. It's non-toxic, so you can use the same oven that you use to cook food in, and that's no problem. So the accessibility is really great. And then another one of my favorite things about it is that it's so versatile. I truly think it's one of the most versatile and underrated craft mediums out there. And back when I first started working with it, it was relatively kind of like not as popular as it is now. There weren't that many people, especially in the United States, making really cool contemporary jewelry out of polymer clay. And it's had this huge explosion in popularity, which is really great because now, people are starting to see this is a really cool medium that you can use to make like very high-end, polished looking pieces. So it's so versatile. It's super lightweight. You can basically make it look like any type of material you want it to look like. So it's kind of a chameleon. And so that brings me to the project that we're working on today, which is Terrazzo inspired. So I really love doing Terrazzo inspired things with polymer clay. Terrazzo is like a type of flooring. So we're going to be making a slab of polymer clay that we're going to cut pieces out of, and it's sort of like a terrazzo imitation. So just to briefly go through all of the things that I have here that we need for the project. So you need some polymer clay. I have a variety of different types of polymer clay right here. The best thing to know about buying polymer clay is that not all brands are created equal. So when you go to the craft store, you go to Michael's to pick up some polymer clay, you'll see a lot of different brands. And then within those brands, you'll see different lines. So for example, there's FIMO, and FIMO has FIMO Professional, FIMO Soft, FIMO Effect. So there's all these different lines. And then Sculpey is the other big brand. So you'll have Sculpey Premo, Sculpey Souffle, Sculpey effect. So there's all sorts of different kinds. What I will say about brands is that you want to try out as many different types as possible. If this is something that you are thinking, you know, you might want to do more than just this one project. Everybody has their own preferences when it comes to clay brands. So some people really, really love FIMO. Other people really love, you know, Sculpey Souffle. So it's kind of just a personal preference thing. And I'll say that certain brands are geared more towards like children's projects and stuff like that, where they're really, really soft and the clay is going to be a little bit more brittle and basically more easily breakable once it's baked. So that is not super ideal to make jewelry out of. So for jewelry making, I would stick to Sculpey Souffle, Sculpey Premo, and any type of FIMO is good for jewelry making. So I would probably stay away from like Sculpey 3, which is more for kids crafts and just like general hobbyist stuff. So for jewelry making, Sculpey Souffle and Sculpey Premo, as well as any type of FIMO, are a good choice. Yeah, so just try out different brands and see which one you like the best. So in addition to the actual clay itself, what we're going to be using for this project, so the work surface that I'm working on, it's just a plain desk, and I have some copy paper. So this is just like printer paper, and then I also have some smaller pieces of cardstock, so a heavier weight cardstock. I prefer to work on paper because the clay doesn't stick to it as easily. So you can also use a wooden cutting board. That's a good surface to work on. And what I have at my studio is a big ceramic tile. So a glazed ceramic tile is also a great surface to use with polymer clay. And then I have a pasta machine here. It's a clay machine technically, but it's basically the same as a pasta machine. This is not necessary. You don't need to have it to work with polymer clay. It just helps when you're doing a lot of work, or if you're using a brand that is firmer. It helps to do your conditioning with the clay machine because it's easier on your hands. So again, totally not necessary. If you don't want to use a pasta machine, you can just use an acrylic roller or a wooden roller. That's also totally fine. Honestly, if you don't have a roller, you can use a glass, like a drinking glass, just anything that is like cylindrical and smooth that you can use to roll the clay with. We're gonna need some shape cutters. So the ones that we're using for this project are these two circle cutters. So you can find shape cutters in a really wide variety of different sizes and shapes, pretty much anywhere. So you can find, Michaels has a great selection of different shape cutters in the polymer clay section, but also in the baking and like cake decorating area. So in that aisle, you can find a lot of cutters that are meant to be used with fondant. So definitely explore all the different possibilities for what you can use as a cutter. And then we have our other clay tools. So I already mentioned the roller, but we're also going to be using a tissue blade. So this is a flexible blade that's sharp on one side. So we're going to use that. And then I also have an X-Acto knife and a pin tool. So we're going to be using this pin tool to poke the holes out that we're going to need to be able to assemble the jewelry. And then in addition to those tools, we have some actual jewelry making tools as well. So a few different types of pliers. We have these cutters for when we're cutting our eye pins, and then these round nose pliers. So you can get kind of an assortment of different jewelry tools from Michaels. They have, I think, a pack where you can buy like 6 different types of pliers all in one pack. And then we're also going to be using these glass beads. So Michaels has a huge variety, huge section of different types of beads. For this particular project, we're going to be using these jade green glass beads. And then we're going to be using some jump rings and some ball posts for the earrings. And I think that is it in terms of supplies. Also, other supplies that you might need, paper towels, and I like to use, this is just 91% isopropyl alcohol, just to clean your hands before you get started and to clean any work surface. You can also use baby wipes. Those are fine as well. So I'm just gonna give my hands a wipe down before I start touching the clay, since polymer clay does a really great job of just picking up any trace of like little lint or dust or pet hair that you might have laying around. So just give your hands a wash, or, you know, kind of just like wipe them down with some alcohol. I like to do this just right before I start touching the clay. Baby wipes are also totally fine. All right. So let's see, to get started with this project, here is kind of a sample, if everybody can see this overhead cam. Here is what the Terrazzo slab looks like. So an example of what mine looks like. What we're gonna start with is we're gonna make the base of the slab first. So the background, which is kind of a white base with some like black speckle mixed in. So in order to get that, I'm gonna start with just plain white. This is a Sculpey Souffle in the color Igloo. It's just a plain white clay. So comes in a bar like that. I'm just gonna break the bar in half. And then this is Sculpey Accents in the color Granite. So it's kind of like a grayish clay with black little speckles in there. And I'm just gonna break off, you know, maybe 1/8 of the bar roughly in granite. These proportions don't have to be super accurate or perfect. That's the great thing about polymer clay and about this project is it can be imperfect, and it can be like, especially with the terrazzo pattern, you want it to look kind of natural and imperfect. So you can use your own colors. You don't have to use the exact colors that I will be using for the project. But the colors that I chose, I thought, you know, they worked well for fall. So some of my favorite colors, like the terracotta and the different shades of green and stuff like that. So they're really pretty for fall. So I'm just going to take the white and then the granite, and I'm going to use my acrylic roller and just start kind of squishing. I'm going to squish the white down a little bit so that it can fit in the pasta machine. So we're going to roll it down a little bit, and then same thing with the granite. Sorry, this table might be shaking a little bit. All right, so we've got this squished down so that it can fit into the machine. So what I'm doing with the clay right now is called conditioning. So before you you know, start working with polymer clay, you're going to want to make sure that it's really conditioned well. So you have it, you know, in a block like this. So we're going to want to mix it up so that it's soft and really malleable before we start working with it. So I'm going to just put these two colors together, and I'm going to stick them into the pasta machine like this. I'll also demonstrate a good method for conditioning without using the pasta machine. So I'm going to set it on the thickest setting, which is on this machine, it's a 9. So the machine has 9 different settings, with 1 being the thinnest and 9 being the thickest. So I rolled it through the machine once, and this is what it looks like. So for color mixing and conditioning, we're going to fold it in half like that. And you see how there's a fold right here. And so we're gonna stick it into the pasta machine with the fold to the side. So you can either do fold to the side or fold on the bottom. What you never want to do is fold on top. So if you guys can see the like the straight on video, I'm going to stick it in where the fold is to the side, or if I have my slab like this, I'm going to fold it up so that the fold is on the bottom and then put it in this way. And the reason that this is important is because if you were to put it in fold to the top, you're forcing air into the clay as you do the conditioning. So we want to avoid doing that so that the clay doesn't have a ton of bubbles in it. So one of the biggest things with working with polymer clay is just avoiding bubbles. So in order to have a nice smooth surface without bubbles, we're going to just do fold to the side, and then we're going to run it through a few more times. So if you don't have a pasta machine, you can do the exact same thing, same technique, where we're going to fold it, the fold is to the side, and basically you're going to start at the bottom and then just roll your clay so that you're pressing the air out of it as you're rolling the roller over it. So you can do the same thing again, make another fold, and then we're going to press the roller and squish all of the air out as we do the conditioning. You know, to do this faster, if you don't have a machine, you can just kind of like, you know, massage the clay with your hands and do color mixing that way. But the risk with that is that you're going to get more bubbles in the clay. So I would caution you to just be careful when you're conditioning about keeping as much air out of the clay as possible. So I'm going to continue to use the pasta machine to get these two colors mixed together as much as possible. And you can already sort of see, I don't know if you can see that in the overhead camera, but you can sort of see the granite is starting to come through the white. So they're starting to mix together. So we're going to put this through the machine a few more times. And I always like to do fold to the side. All right, so we're getting there. It's almost totally mixed. All right, so I think this is pretty good. So we have kind of a good blend of white where the base is mostly just white, and we have some speckles. And you can see the granite speckles throughout that white base.
So Elise, it seems like we have a few questions about this pasta maker.
Yeah.
So the first one we have from CQ, it says, can you explain the difference between using a pasta machine versus depth guides?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so if you have worked with polymer clay before, you might have heard of the concept of depth guides. So depth guides are basically just two pieces of acrylic, or some people use popsicle sticks taped together, that you put on either side of your slab of clay, so that when you roll over the clay with an acrylic roller, the depth or the thickness of the slab is consistent throughout. So I hope that makes sense, but the depth guides come in a variety of different thicknesses. I think one of the common thicknesses for depth guides is 4 millimeters. So you would have like two pieces of acrylic, kind of like a ruler almost, that are 4 millimeters thick, and you place them on either side of the slab so that when you roll over the slab stays one consistent thickness. So that's one method of doing it if you don't have a machine or you would rather not use a pasta machine. And then, so with the pasta machine, you can set the width of the rollers so that they are however far apart or close together you want them to be. And this pasta machine doesn't actually have a millimeter guide, but it looks like the widest setting on this machine is about, probably about 2 millimeters. So it's fairly thin. If you want a thicker slab, you're going to want to use either a pasta machine that allows you to make a slab that is thicker than 2 millimeters, or just do it by hand with depth guides. So if you don't want to purchase actual depth guides, you can use popsicle sticks. So you can put like 3 or 4 popsicle sticks on top of each other and tape them together and use those as depth guides. And that's a great way to do it as well. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that's great. And we also had a few more questions about the pasta maker. Some people saying, well, I think you already answered this, what setting on the pasta maker you were using, and then what is the best thickness to get it to?
Yeah.
Does that depend on your project?
Yeah, so it does depend on the project, I think. And there's also a bit of nuance to that when we're doing terrazzo specifically. And so I'll talk about that as we get into, doing the surface design on top of the base of the slab. So for me personally, the thickness that I like my earrings to be when I make them is, I would say, anywhere between 2 and 4 millimeters. 4 is a bit too thick. I would say 3 is a really good happy medium. Depending on the style, sometimes I like to go as thin as 2. So it kind of just depends on the project and also personal preference. The thickness will influence the size of jump rings that you need. So I have some 6 millimeter jump rings. I also frequently use 8 millimeter jump rings. So if you have a thicker piece of clay, the jump ring is going to need to be bigger to accommodate that. Yeah, any other questions about the pasta machine?
The only other question we have so far is, how do you not make the clay stick to the acrylic roller?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mentioned earlier that the work surface that I like to use when I'm in my studio is a ceramic tile. So I'm at home right now in my little like kind of makeshift home studio, so I don't have the ceramic tile with me, but I'm talking about like a plain glazed ceramic tile. So it's a shiny, smooth surface. So when I'm working on that, the clay sticks to the tile rather than the roller. So basically the clay is sticky. Any brand of polymer clay, it's going to stick to something when you're working with it. So it's either going to stick to the roller or it's going to stick to the surface that it's being rolled against. So if you're working on a ceramic tile or some other very slick, smooth surface, the clay is going to stick to that surface rather than the roller. So for instance, like if I move this paper and I'm just working with my clay here, it also kind of sticks to the table. So in between each roll, I'm just going to pick it up and rotate it. So I'm going to roll it down and then pick it up and rotate it again. So by doing this, I'm ensuring that the clay is not like really, really stuck to the table, because if you just keep going over it more and more, you're pushing it into the work surface. And then when you try to peel it off, it's going to rip or stick too much. So if you're working on something like a ceramic tile, that's the way I like to do it. The reason I have the cardstock is because when it comes to the step where we're going to be cutting things out with the cutters, then it's better to have your clay stick to the inside of the cutter for this project rather than sticking to the surface. So it's kind of like a very delicate balance. You're always having to work with the clay and work against the nature of the clay, which is that it is sticky and wants to stick to whatever surfaces you're using with it. So yeah, my personal preference is to work on a ceramic tile, picking up the slab frequently and putting it back down so that it doesn't get too stuck to the tile.
Okay, that's great. I think that is all we have for questions so far.
All right, cool. So I'm going to move on with actually talking about thickness again. So I've got this slab here, and like I said, the pasta machine, this particular one, the widest setting is about 2 millimeters. So if you look at this, it's got the terrazzo slab. It has all sorts of, different patterns on top of it. So what happens is when we're starting to place those decorations on top of the slab, so we're putting little bits of colored clay on top of this base. And when we roll it out, we want to push those shapes on top of the clay. We want to push them into the base of the slab so that they don't stick out, so that it's all like one smooth kind of uniform surface. So you can see with this one, it looks like it's all one piece of clay, like it's very smooth and very flat. So in order to do that, once we put the decoration on the surface of the slab, we're going to need to roll it out more to push that clay down. And so because of that, we want our slab to be a little bit thicker when we start putting the surface decoration on, so that when we roll it out, it's the right width or thickness for earrings. So I'm going to just get some of the air out of this slab, and then I'm just going to kind of eyeball it to about 4 millimeters. So I think that looks to be about the right thickness. So I'm going to just hold this up so you can see what I'm talking about. So let's see. If you can see, there is a slight difference in like the thickness of this piece versus this piece. So this is the finished slab, and this is the base that we're going to be working with before we start decorating it. So a slightly thicker base. All right, so we have our base. We're good to go there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start making the colors that we need to decorate the top of the base. So since we're making terrazzo, one of my favorite things about terrazzo is that it is very random. So we want the design to look as random as possible. If it starts to look too like perfect, it doesn't really look like an authentic terrazzo pattern any longer. And you can see in this slab, some pieces are kind of more geometric and have sharper borders. Other pieces are kind of just like little blob shapes. Some of the pieces are one flat color. Others have some texture or some pattern in the smaller pieces. So to get that effect, we're going to do some marbling. So I'm going to make one of my favorite colors, which is terracotta. And in order to get terracotta, this is Sculpey Souffle in the color pumpkin. It's an orangey color, and then souffle in the color latte. So we're just going to mix these two colors together in equal proportions, so a 1-to-1 mix of pumpkin and latte. And since we don't need a ton for this slab, I'm just going to take like 1/8 of a bar of both. Just going to cut it out with my X-Acto knife. I'm just going to get 1/8. All right, so we have pumpkin and latte. I'm going to do what I did before, just kind of like flattening these pieces out a little bit before they go into the pasta machine. All right. So pumpkin, latte, we're going to squish those together, and then we're going to mix them using that same fold to the side technique using this pasta machine.
We did have one person ask, what name brand is your pasta machine? Do you know it off the top of your head?
Yeah, so this pasta machine is the, I think it's just the Craft Smart brand from Michaels. So this is the Craft Smart pasta machine. Makins also makes a pasta machine. The one that I use in my studio is a Lucy clay machine. Another great option is the Atlas machine. So the brand name is Atlas. But this is the one that you can buy at Michaels. It's the Craft Smart one. All right, and like I said before, if you don't have a pasta machine, if you don't want to use the pasta machine, you are more than welcome to just squish the colors together with your hands. You can kind of just like mix it like you would mix Play-Doh or, you know, whatever until the colors are blended to your satisfaction. And you can also do this just with an acrylic roller or with, you know, a rolling pin or whatever else you might happen to have on hand. So, you know, mixing the colors like this, just rolling it out into a thin slab and then folding it and then rolling it out again and then folding it again, and basically continuing to do that. And see, as you can see here, the clay is sticking to my roller because the desk is not, it's not a smooth enough surface for the clay to stick to the desk. So that's kind of what I was talking about before with work surface things. So we're just going to keep mixing it like this until the colors blend together, making sure that we kind of always are squishing that air out rather than trapping it in the clay. So you can kind of see we're starting to get that nice brown orangey terracotta. Started with these two colors and now we have this color as a result. All right, so let's see. In order to get a nice marbled look, I'm gonna just like rip this, just gonna rip this into two pieces. So I'm gonna set one piece aside so that we can do some of the surface decoration with just a solid terracotta, and then we're gonna do some of it with a marbled terracotta. So I'm gonna take a little bit of this white. Like I said before, proportions don't have to be exact. You can kind of just, you know, whatever your heart desires. That's the beauty of it, is that, you know, it's always going to look different. It's always going to be unique. So we're just going to take a little bit of clay, a little bit of white clay. And
Elise, it looks like we might have lost your top camera, your top-down camera.
Oh.
There we go. All good.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So I've got just this little blob of white, and then I'm going to make a little blob of terracotta. I'm just ripping pieces off and kind of squishing them together to make a little ball. All right, so now we have, just gonna roll these together so we have a ball. So we've got a ball of terracotta and a ball of white. So now I'm going to just roll this ball onto the desk like this so that it makes a little snake. So I've got a snake, and then I'm gonna make the same size snake with the white. All right, so we've got two snakes of equal length. We're gonna just put them together, squish them together. So I've got them together like that. And then what I'm gonna do to marble these two colors together is I'm going to hold one end onto the table like this with my hand. And then the other end, I'm gonna grab and just push away from me so that the two colors twist together. So I ended up here, I'm gonna move it back here and just continue twisting the two colors together like that. And then I'm gonna turn it around so that the end I was holding with my left hand is now in my right hand. Do the same thing from the other side, just twisting these two colors together in kind of like a candy cane stripe pattern. So now we have a snake that looks kind of like a rope like this. So I'm going to take this longer snake, I'm going to double it up and fold it over like that, and just kind of squish it together, squish these two parts together. And then I'm going to do the same thing again with this one. So we're going to roll these two parts together. And then I'm going to roll this so that they kind of combine. Gonna roll this into the table, and then same thing again. Double it up, hold it down, twist the two ends together like this. So we're basically just going to repeat this process until the white and the terracotta start to blend together in this cool marble pattern. So this is just one way to do marbling. There are lots of different kind of marbling techniques out there. This is the one that I've always done. It's kind of my favorite way to do it. But you know, don't be afraid to experiment and play around. You can also do marbling in, you know, different ways. If you have the pasta machine, you can do it with that. All right. So with the marbling, you just kind of have to eyeball it. If we go through this process too many times, eventually the clay is going to mix together to the point where it looks more just like one color rather than distinctive marbling pattern. So I might just do one or two more times before it's mixed the way that I want it to be.
We have one question in chat. Can you recommend any book to learn these techniques for beginners?
Well, I actually don't know if I would recommend any book out there, but I do have some other recommendations. So there's a woman, her name is Ginger Davis Allman, and she has a website called The Blue Bottle Tree. And she's been working with polymer clay for decades. She's kind of like the polymer clay encyclopedia. Her website has any information you could ever possibly hope to want about polymer clay. It's really like a very comprehensive resource for all polymer clay techniques. She's got a ton of really great articles for beginners. She's got a lot of advanced techniques on there as well. So The Blue Bottle Tree was the name of that website. She's also on Instagram. You can find her on Instagram. And then there's a few other, there's a clay account called Fry Clay, like Friday, only Fry Clay. They also post a ton of really great information, lots of good resources. You can find me on Instagram. I'd be happy to point you towards any of that stuff. But yeah, those are my biggest recommendations. There are polymer clay books out there, and I have a lot of them, but I'll say most of them are not geared towards like more contemporary projects. So if you're looking for that sort of a thing, especially jewelry making, you're not going to find what you're looking for in most of the published books that exist out there. So what I'm doing now, since I'm kind of unconsciously doing it without talking about it, I'm rolling up this marbled snake into a ball. So I'm just kind of like squishing it all together so we get a ball. And then just rolling it between my hands so that it all kind of comes together. And you can see now that we have this really cool pattern of marbling on the surface of this ball. So I'm going to squish it down like this. So now we've got a little bit of a slab. And I think I like this side better. So I'm going to just roll this out with my acrylic roller. And I'm gonna roll this really, really thin. So this little piece of marbling, I'm gonna roll it as thin as possible. And the reason for that is that we're going to cut pieces out of it and we're gonna put them on the slab. So I want the surface decoration to be very thin. All right. So we're gonna go as thin as I can go without it ripping. And like I mentioned before, when I'm rolling this out, I'm picking it up in between each pass with the roller so that it doesn't get too stuck to the table. You can also do this on paper or on cardstock. So let's see, might be a little bit easier for me to do it on the cardstock. So if I do it on cardstock, you can see it sticks to the roller rather than the table. Okay, I think this is good. So we just have now a very, very thin sheet of marbling. The marble pattern has kind of expanded and it looks different on the back. So you can kind of pick which side you like better. I like this side, so we're gonna go with that. So we've got that now. So that's the terracotta color. And we're gonna make the green now. So this is Sculpey Souffle in the color Jade. And I'm gonna just cut off like a tiny, just like a tiny little sliver. That might even be too much. I'm gonna break off a little piece. So we've got a really tiny little ball of jade. And I'm gonna take more white. Again, just kind of eyeballing it. Depends on how saturated you want the color to be. So polymer clay is a really excellent tool. Possibly the best, I might say the best medium that exists for teaching color theory. And the reason for that is that it's basically exactly the same as paint. So the theory behind the color mixing, it's the same as if you were to mix paint colors together. But the advantage with polymer clay is that, you know, you can do it with your hands. It's very tactile, and also it's sculptural. So just the sculptural element, I think, is a really good tool for teaching color theory and color mixing. So we're gonna get a bit of white. I'm actually gonna use even less green. I want this to be like a very pastel, kind of not saturated shade of green. So just like a really tiny little bit. So for reference, that's kind of the size of white I'm using versus the size of green. So I'm gonna just stick that on there. And then in addition to the green, I'm also going to use a little bit of latte. So this is the same color I used to make the terracotta. I use latte a ton because what it does when you add it to any color mix, it helps to just make the color muted. So rather than like a vibrant or a brighter color, we're gonna have more of a muted green. So I'm gonna add some latte on there as well. And for color mixing, you can actually use that method of marbling that I showed. So rolling it into a snake and then just kind of, you know, doubling the snake up and continuing to do that. You can do that to mix colors as well. So if you don't have a pasta machine, this is a good way of mixing colors together. Were there any questions?
We had one question earlier. Do you also have the color recipe for FIMO?
Yeah, so I don't know the FIMO colors off the top of my head because I don't work with FIMO as much, but the great thing about polymer clay is that it comes in such a wide range of colors that you can pretty much make any color using any brand just with the colors. You know, all polymer clay lines come in primary colors. So for FIMO, I think they have, you know, they have an orange color. If they don't have an orange color, you can get red and yellow and mix them together to make orange. And then you can get a brown color and mix some brown into that orange to get more of a muted orange. And then, you know, if it's too dark, mix in some white and you get a lighter shade. As far as the granite, if you want to use a different brand and you want to get the same granite effect, you can actually just use black pepper. Everybody has black pepper, I'm sure. So you can either use the kind that's already ground, or you can grind up your own black pepper and sprinkle it into the clay. That's a perfectly good way of getting like little speckles and kind of like a texture in the clay. I use black pepper all the time. in my work. You can also use glitter. I haven't personally done this, but I've heard other people that use glitter in their clay to get kind of a speckled effect.
On that same note, someone asked, if you use pepper, do you need to seal the clay?
It depends on, I guess, the coarseness of the pepper. So if you're using like a very coarsely ground black pepper and it's like kind of sticking out of the clay, you know, you might want to seal it just to avoid like pieces of pepper coming out. But I wouldn't use coarse ground black pepper anyways. I would use more of a finely ground black pepper so that you would avoid the texture of the clay being too rough. In general, you don't ever need to seal polymer clay unless you're putting something on top of it after it's been baked. Like if you're using a glitter on the surface or like a gold foil or gold leaf or something like that, then you would want to seal it just to, you know, make sure that it's protected, especially if someone's going to be wearing it like jewelry. So I'm just going into the pasta machine to finish up this color mixing.
And then we had another question earlier. I have problems when sanding and buffing in that I'll sand down to bubbles deeper in the clay and then it looks bad. Does this happen to you, or is there anything I should do differently?
Sanding, I would say sanding and buffing, it's a very like nuanced topic. So there's so many different factors that go into it. The clay, the type of clay that you're using and the brand makes a huge difference when you're sanding and buffing. I'll just kind of recommend again the Blue Bottle Tree, Ginger Davis Almond. She has a really, really comprehensive sanding and buffing guide. And I think you can buy it for like $10 on her website. And that's kind of a game changer. So I would definitely suggest looking into her sanding and buffing guide. But in general, some brands of clay are a lot more difficult to sand. So Sculpey Souffle, the brand that I'm using now, it does not respond well to sanding because it's more textured. Other brands are easier to sand. FIMO and Sculpey Premo are better with sanding. So yeah, I think her guide has a lot of information about sanding on there. So this is like the finished green color. So it's a very pale, kind of muted pastel green. I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to take a little bit of this green and just rip off a little piece. And I'm going to mix a little bit of granite in with this green. So again, with the terrazzo, I'm trying to give it as random and varied of a look as possible. So if we did a terrazzo where all of the surface decoration was just one flat color, it looks very like kind of you planned it that way and it doesn't look as authentic or authentically terrazzo. So I'm having some green that's just plain green and then some that has this granite mixed in. And then I might even mix in a little bit of yellow. So this is Sculpey Premo in cadmium yellow. So just a very basic, bright kind of primary yellow color. And I'm just gonna add like a touch of yellow. Cadmium yellow goes a long way. So it's always better to start with less than you think you want. And I'm just mixing this up with my hands since it doesn't have to be too precise. It's just going to get cut up into little pieces and put onto the slab. All right, so you can start to see the yellow is coming through. All right, so now we have this green and then we've got a green that's a little bit more yellow tinted. All right, and then let's see. I think that's it. So I'm gonna also just use some of the granite just plain by itself. to put onto the slab. And I'm gonna roll it out so that it's thinner. I think for this one, I might actually go through the pasta machine. So I'm gonna change the setting and make it thinner. So I'm setting it to a 4, and I'm just gonna roll this. All right, so now we have a really super thin sheet of granite. So what we have here now, we're finished with the colors. So we've got this marbled terracotta, we've got granite, we've got this green color, solid terracotta, and then this yellowish green with some speckles mixed in. So that's kind of the combination of different colors we're using for this terrazzo. And I'm going to start with, let's see. So here's our base. I'm going to start with the marbled terracotta. So for this one, to imitate authentic terrazzo, we want some pieces to be larger and some pieces to be smaller. So I'm going to just rip this in some pieces, and then I'm just going to take a little piece off, rip it off with my thumb, and then stick it onto the slab. So this is the fun part where it really doesn't have to be precise. You can just kind of place these wherever you feel like. And I will say, since we're going to be rolling this slab thinner for earrings, you want to place the little pieces closer together than you actually want them to be, because when we start to roll it out, they're going to expand and the pattern is going to get larger. So the pattern for this one was smaller, and then once I rolled it out, the pieces kind of expanded and got bigger. So we're going to take pieces off and just kind of going to rip a little piece off with my finger and just stick it onto the slab.
Looks like we have a few more questions.
Mm-hmm.
So if I wanted to use a small toaster or convection oven, how would I adjust the temperature?
So I'll talk about baking in a little bit more. At the end, I'll definitely give like a thorough overview of baking polymer clay. But I use a small convection oven, like a tabletop convection oven in my studio. And there's nothing different that you need to do with the temperature, really. You should be using the same temperature that you would use in a kitchen oven. But the biggest thing with baking is just most ovens don't actually bake at the temperature they say they're baking at. So it's kind of important to, especially if it's a new oven, to use an oven thermometer. So you get an accurate look at, you know, what temperature the oven actually is versus what you set it to. Most ovens bake anywhere from like 10 to 50 degrees off what you actually set it to. So that's definitely good to know with baking. But I'll cover baking. I'll talk all about baking in a little bit when we're done with the slab. Okay, so I've got some of these pieces on there. Now I'm gonna do the same thing, only with this solid terrazzo, or sorry, solid terracotta. Gonna roll it into a thinner sheet first. All right, so for this one, since like I said, the best thing to do to make terrazzo look authentic is to, you know, break it up and do some pieces that look like jagged edges and then some that look more geometric and more square. So I'm gonna stick this slab to the table, and then I'm gonna use my X-Acto knife and just kind of slice little pieces away. So I'm going to slice this into little strips. And then I'm going to just, with my X-Acto knife, I'm going to take just a tiny little like square shaped piece, and I'm going to stick it on there. So I'm going to basically keep doing this taking pieces with the X-Acto knife and just sticking them onto the slab.
Got a few more questions as well. So one person says, how do you work so freely without getting dirt or dust into the clay?
Well, a big thing is just making sure that the surface is clean and that your hands are clean. But at the end of the day, like there's only so much you can do. I try to work in an environment where there's not a lot of dust or dirt. So if you have like a designated crafting room, that helps. If you have pets, don't let them, you know, if you're able to have a space that you don't let your pets into, that really helps. Like I have 2 cats and they're not allowed to go into this room. So it can definitely be a challenge to keep, you know, the dust and the hair and stuff away from the clay. But after a while, it just kind of becomes second nature, like cleaning everything before you start working, even while you're working. Like, you know, I have some alcohol wipes in my studio, hand sanitizing wipes, and I'll just every so often just use one of those and make sure that, you know, I'm cleaning my hands while I work. Another big thing is make sure you think about what you're wearing while you're working with polymer clay. Don't wear like a big fuzzy sweater. If you're wearing anything that is very like fibrous, that's shedding fibers, those are going to get into the clay. And yeah, I try to wear, I mean, obviously I'm not wearing right now anything like this, but I usually try to wear lighter, more neutral colors that don't like shed fibers. If you're wearing a bright red t-shirt, your little red t-shirt fibers are going to get into the clay while you're working. So just thinking about stuff like that. But at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do. And I don't stress out over every tiny little fiber that little speck that appears on the clay, because that's just kind of a fact of life when you're working with polymer clay. All right, I think I'm good there. I'm gonna move on to the green. Gonna roll out a thin sheet of green. So I might vary the size here. So I'm going to do the same thing with this green, only I'm going to make the pieces a bit bigger. And kind of, you can cut square pieces, you can cut triangular pieces, kind of just whatever you feel like to break it up. You can make your pieces overlap on the slab, or you can keep them separate so that none of them touch each other. That's kind of up to you. And make sure you're going right up to the edge so that you don't have any areas that aren't covered. I'm just going to hold this up here so that you have a better look of what this looks like at this stage. So you can see the pieces are just kind of resting on the surface of the slab. You can see that. They're not like pushed into the slab yet. We'll do one more here. Okay, and then we're using this more yellow green with the speckles in it. I'm gonna run this one through the pasta machine. So for this one, I'm gonna do the same thing that I did with the marbled. I'm just gonna rip it into little pieces and use my hands to stick these pieces onto the slab. Again, just for variety. And this is just kind of a universal technique that you can do with any colors. I really love to use like effect type colors when I do terrazzo. So translucent clay, the speckled clay, just to give it like some depth so that it looks more like real terrazzo. Any colors you want to do this with, you totally can. And now I'm gonna, let's see, I'm gonna go in and add some granite. Gonna rip off a piece of granite, stick it down to the table, and then make some slices. So when this is done and this slab is rolled out to its final thickness, we'll probably have enough clay to make a few pairs of earrings. And, you know, I'm just going to be making one for the purposes of this, but, you know, the bigger the slab is, the more you'll be able to cut from it. So, you know, think about that if you're wanting to make just one pair, or if you're wanting to make more than one pair, about how much clay you're going to want to use for each slab. All right, so I kind of look and see like, where have I not used this color yet on the slab? So if it's looking the way that I want it to look, or if it's looking like, oh, there's a hole that I need to kind of fill, just kind of eyeballing it, you know, wherever I feel like putting these little pieces.
We've had a few questions about storing your clay, whether it be the leftover bricks or these pieces that you've made.
Yeah. So the good thing about polymer clay is that unlike other types of clay, it's not going to dry out. So you can actually, like, I could walk away and leave all of this clay sitting out on the table for a month and come back to it, and it will still be fine. It won't be dried out. It might need to be, you know, reconditioned, but it's not going to be like unusable. So in terms of storing, polymer clay, since it is plastic, it's vinyl based, and so certain types of plastic will interact poorly with the clay. So you're going to want to make sure that if you're storing it in like plastic storage containers, that you're using containers that are made out of the right type of plastic that's not going to have a bad interaction with the polymer. So some types of plastic, like if you put polymer clay in it and leave it for a week, you'll come back and the polymer clay will have eaten through the plastic. So certain, yeah, and I can't tell you off the top of my head which like numbers of plastic are bad to use with polymer, but just in general know that not all types of plastic are safe. I personally use like plastic sandwich baggies, and those are perfectly fine. That's my favorite way of storing, is just, you know, storing my different colors in sandwich baggies. Other people use different types of containers. You can use any container that's not plastic too. Glass is fine. Like if you have glass Tupperwares that you're not using, those would work well. So I think that's good. So you can tell the difference here between these two slabs. So like I said, this is what it looks like before it's rolled out, and then this is after. So all of the little surface patterns have expanded and gotten larger. And, you know, I could go on and keep working on this and getting it absolutely perfect and making sure there's no, like, you know, no white space at all, just kind of filling it up so that it's really, really like a very dense pattern. But that's just personal preference. You know, you can make a looser pattern or a tighter pattern, totally up to you. So for this one, I'm pretty much done with it. I think it looks good the way it is. So I'm going to take my roller and just kind of push all of those surface pieces into the slab so that they all kind of get stuck in there. And then I'm going to pick the slab up, rotate it, and do that again. Pick it up, rotate it, roll the roller. For some reason, I've realized that I don't know if everybody uses a roller like this, but I like to use it from like away from me and rolling towards me. That's just, I don't know why, but that's how I like to do the roller. So pulling it towards me as I use it, rather than like when you usually see someone using a rolling pin, they're usually going away from their body. I find it easier and I have more control over it if I'm rolling it towards my body. So it's starting to get thinner now, and you can see the pieces are now kind of fully incorporated with the slab. So it looks like just one piece instead of a base with a bunch of little pieces on top. So this is where the pasta maker comes in handy. I'm gonna set it to the thickest setting again, and I'm gonna take my whole slab and just roll it through. So now that has kind of squished my pattern so that it looks more like, like all the pieces have now expanded and they're all longer. So this is what today's looks like, and this is what the one that I made this one a while ago. This is what this looks like. So now we have our finished terrazzo slab, and it's ready to be cut up with the different cutters. So I'm gonna take a piece of cardstock, put the slab down, and we have two cutters. So there's a larger circle and a smaller circle. And I'm gonna just look at the slab, think about which part of it I like the best. So like, oh, I really like this corner over here, like this little piece. So I'm gonna take the cutter, just put it on there, and then I'm gonna push it down with my hand. And I like to take the cutter and kind of just rotate it around, really make sure that it's gotten a clean cut. And so when you take the cutter and you pick it up, you'll notice the clay is stuck in there. So in order to get it out, I'll just take my finger, just my middle finger, and just kind of gently pop it out like that. So now we have a circle. We're gonna cut that into 2 half circles. And then we're gonna take this smaller circle and do the same thing. So we're gonna just pop it out with our finger. So for this design, we need obviously 2 earrings to make a pair. So we have 2 half circles and 2 smaller circles. And then there's a bead that's gonna go on the top. So we need one more, well, we need 2 more of these. So one, yeah, and then we need one more of this to make a pair. So I'm going to move this slab over here. So now we have 2 larger circles, 2 smaller circles. So the next step for me personally, what I like to do is, somebody mentioned sanding earlier. And when we talk about sanding, that's usually referring to sanding the edges of a piece so that they're smooth. Because especially if you're selling things that you're making, you don't want anything to have raggedy edges. It doesn't look very professional. So sanding is one thing you can do where you can take those rough edges off after baking. Or what I like to do personally is smoothing the edges with my finger before baking. So I'm just going to take this piece and I'm going to smooth the edges like this with my finger. And this kind of just takes some practice and some getting used to. What I always say is you have to kind of handle the clay as if you're handling like a delicate butterfly. Because it's very it's so easy to just like squish it or put a huge fingerprint in there or dent it with your fingernail on accident. So just be very, very gentle with it at this stage so that nothing gets squished. So I'm smoothing the edges, and I'm just going to do this with every piece. Another thing I like to do to avoid fingerprints is there are these things called finger cots, and they're basically, it's instead of wearing gloves, just the fingers of gloves. So they're called finger cots, and it's just like a little latex thing that you put on your finger, and you can roll it down your finger so that you know, you don't have fingerprints that get left on the clay. So smoothing these pieces. And then we need to use our tissue blade. And I'm just going to cut each of these circles, let's see, kind of just in half with the blade. If you cut them and realize that you thought you were cutting it in the middle, but you weren't actually, and one piece is way bigger than the other one, you can just kind of fix that after you make that initial cut. All right, same thing here.
Someone made the comment that they have a problem that clay gets stuck to their cutters. They ask, what can I use to get my shape out in a form that I do not distort the shape?
Yeah, so
problem when I use small cutters.
Yeah, so with small cutters, this goes back to what I was saying about working on a smooth, glossy surface where your clay is going to stick to something. So it's about using, rather than like fighting against the nature of the clay, we're going to go with the nature of the clay. So either your clay is going to stick to the cutter, or it's going to stick to the surface that you're working with. So for example, like if I cut out, let's say this piece is stuck to my work surface, because if I'm using a really glossy, smooth ceramic tile, the clay is going to stick to it like clay does. And then if I use my cutter to cut out a piece, it's going to stick to the surface rather than sticking to the cutter. So then I'll take the rest of this and peel it away, and we're left with the shape which is sticking to the table. So then instead of trying to like, oh, well, now it's stuck, I have to scrape it off of the table with my hands, I'm going to use the tissue blade and just kind of scrape it off of the table with the blade. So then you have your shape, it's cut out, it's not distorted. You know, you didn't have to poke it out with some sort of tool from the cutter. So you're either going to have your clay stick to the cutter, or it's going to stick to the surface. There's not really anything in between. Some people will tell you to use water or cornstarch as like kind of a mold release. So you can use cornstarch, coat your cutter with cornstarch, and then try cutting it, and it won't stick. But I just find that's too much trouble. I'd rather just let the clay do what it does, which is stick to something. So instead of sticking to the cutter, we want it to stick to the table. And then, you know, just using the tissue blade to kind of quickly scrape under there. And you can also push. So it's kind of like technique. You develop a technique with the cutter. If this is stuck to the table, you know, I can either do it this way like I did, or I can take it in both hands and kind of like push away from me like that. So yeah, that's one way of doing it without getting the clay stuck to the inside of the cutter. So now that we have these shapes cut out, we are going to need to make some holes so that we can assemble them with jump rings after they're baked. And this is what you can do if you don't have any other tools available. If you have a very small drill bit, you can use a drill bit to drill into the clay after it's baked. That's what I do. I have a Dremel tool that I will drill my holes with afterwards. But you can also poke the holes beforehand. This is just a very small like needle tool from a bunch of clay tools that I got from Michaels. So it's got a very fine kind of needle point. And since these earrings are going to be like this, we're going to need to have 2 holes in the half circle pieces and 1 hole in the smaller circle pieces. So I'm just going to kind of poke a hole sort of near the top, but not too close to the edge since we don't want it to rip. And I'm just going to kind of like twist this tool around and push it in and then draw it out. And then turn it over and do the same thing on the other side. when I first started making earrings, I didn't have a drill bit. I didn't know about any of that stuff. I didn't have a pin tool, so I actually used a straw. You can use a very small straw, and basically like you would use a cutter and just kind of like stick the straw in where you want the hole. It's going to be a larger hole, but it gives you a cleaner look than just kind of, you know, punching through the clay with a tool. So we're going to do the holes in all of these.
We had a question from Hannah. Do you oil your pasta machine because the clay sometimes gets stuck? And also the colors sometimes leave a stain, which brighter colors absorb.
Yeah, so I don't oil the machine. I do clean it. So my clay machine, the one that I use personally, not this one, but the one at my studio, it has so underneath the pasta machine, there are blades called scraper blades underneath the rollers. So on most pasta machines, the scraper blades are just kind of stuck in there and you can't get them out. You have to take the whole machine apart to get to the scraper blades to clean them. On my machine, you can take the scraper blades off and clean them and then just put them right back on. But in any machine like this, to clean it easily, you can just take a paper towel and kind of like wipe underneath the bottom of the machine. You can run your paper towel through the machine like this and then, you know, kind of like clean it that way. So just wiping it like that. Alcohol is the best thing to use to clean polymer clay from your hands or from a surface. Alcohol dissolves polymer clay. So you can just take a paper towel and kind of clean it with some alcohol on the paper towel. And yeah, so between colors, that's the best way to clean it, so that if you, I'm just dropping everything. If you were to use like a really bright color, like a red or something, you're going to want to clean the machine before you start using another color like white, so that you don't get red streaks all over your white clay. All right, so we've got our holes. So that's kind of the process for that. So now we have these pieces that we're going to use for our pair of earrings. All right, so at this point, what I would do is put them in the oven to bake. And I am at home, so I don't have my tabletop convection oven here. But luckily I have these pieces, which are already baked. So I'll use these for the next part. But I just want to talk about baking real quick. So the main things with baking are that you can use your kitchen oven. So it doesn't matter what oven you use. It's perfectly fine to use a kitchen oven. Each brand of clay has its own baking temperature. So most clays, like the ones that I'm working with now, the baking temperature is kind of a standard 275 Fahrenheit, but some clays have a 265 baking temperature. And then there's one brand of clay that has like a 300 Fahrenheit baking temperature. So depending on the brand that you're using, the baking temperature does vary. So you're going to want to check the instructions on the package and make sure you check that before baking. And then as far as the instructions on the package go, it will tell you to bake for anywhere from 15 minutes to 30 minutes. And that I would definitely kind of throw out the window. You don't want to bake your clay for 15 minutes. And the reason why is because the molecules, so the vinyl molecules in the clay, when they cure, they need to kind of all like cure well enough so that they bind together. And if the clay is not baked for long enough, you're not giving those molecules enough time to bind together. So when the clay is underbaked, you'll find that it's very brittle and will break easily. So, you know, if you try to bend it, it'll be brittle and will kind of snap before it bends. And that's a clear sign that it's underbaked. So I would bake for no less than 30 minutes. Personally, I bake for closer to an hour. So like 50, 60 minutes. Polymer clay, you can actually bake it for as long as you want to. It's not going to like burn or catch on fire if it's in the oven for longer than an hour, as long as the oven is at 275. So that brings me to my next point, which is baking temperature and making sure you have an oven thermometer. So if you have an oven thermometer on hand, just kind of stick it in the oven with your clay. Make sure that it's actually baking at the temperature you set it at and not way under or way over. So if it's baking too hot, you might find that you get a lot of bubbles in the clay, and also your clay might be prone to changing colors. So the setup that I like to use with baking, I actually bake on paper. So before anybody freaks out, it is totally okay to bake on paper. Paper does not catch fire at such low temperatures as 275. My only caveat with that is that you want to make sure that the paper is not anywhere near any of the heating mechanisms in the oven. So you're not baking it like right next to the top of the oven where like the heating coils are. But I like to bake on paper because it leaves a smooth surface on the clay. It's not going to have any weird shiny spots. And it's also not prone to spikes in temperature. So if you're baking on metal, like let's say you just throw your pieces on a cookie sheet and bake them on a cookie sheet with nothing on top, the pieces are going to be much more prone to toasting. So it's just like anything else that you put in the oven. They can get toasted on the top where the color changes and it gets kind of yellow, especially if you're working with white clay and you want to keep it, you know, looking actually white rather than yellow. You want to make sure that you're not baking on metal, or if you are going to use a metal surface, you're covering it with like paper or cardboard first. And then another good thing with baking that you can do is called tenting. So covering the pieces with something, you can cover with foil. If you have like a turkey pan, so like one of those foil pans that you cook turkeys in, you can just flip one of those over and put it on top of your pieces to tent. Honestly, a great way to bake is if you have a pizza box, like if you ordered a pizza recently, and if you have like a clean part of the pizza box, you just put some clay in the pizza box, close the box so there's something protecting the pieces on the inside. The main point of all of that is just something should be covering your clay. So there's an element that is protecting your clay from the heating coils in the oven. Yeah, so baking on paper is fine. Just make sure that it's not like touching any of the hot heating elements in the oven. And oven thermometer is the best tool to use to make sure that you're actually getting the right temperature that it says when you set it on the oven. Are there any questions about baking stuff?
Yes, we do have a few questions about baking. One person asks, if you're using different brands of clay with different baking temperatures, which temperature would you use?
Yeah, that's a great question. As far as combining different brands, I combine all the time brands that have different baking temperatures where one is 275 and one is 265. So that's not a huge difference. So a 10-degree temperature difference is not going to make or break anything. So in order to avoid the clay under baking and being brittle or like more prone to breakage, I combine clays that bake at 265 and clays that bake at 275, and then I'll bake it at 275. And that's totally fine to do. I've never had any, any bad results from that. I will say that FIMO in particular is very sensitive to temperature. So FIMO is really prone to color shifting. So I wouldn't suggest mixing FIMO with any other brand of clay. It makes it a little bit more difficult to get a true color match out of FIMO. So like certain types of FIMO clay and certain colors, it might look one way in the package, and then once it's baked, the color is completely different. So just be aware of that. It's perfectly fine to mix like the different types of Sculpey clay. I've mixed those before without any issues, although I mostly just use Sculpey Souffle. But if you have a clay, like there's a brand of clay called Kato, and that bakes closer to 300, and you would definitely not want to mix that with anything else because there's such a difference in the baking temperatures. because then, you know, the Kato would be underbaked and the Sculpey would be overbaked. So in that instance, I would just kind of stick to using one brand. And if the reason that you want to mix different brands is because you like the color from one brand, you can make any color using any brand of clay. So just, you know, looking into color theory a little bit. And if you really like, if there's a really pretty color, but you're like, oh, I don't want to use that brand of clay, you can figure out how to make that same color using the brand that you do like. All right, so I think, yeah, that's a good kind of overview of baking. These pieces have been baked already, so they're ready to go. They are slightly flexible. So when polymer clay is baked, if it's baked correctly, it should be flexible and you should be able to bend it a little bit without it snapping. So I'm gonna kind of bring over our jewelry tools now that we have these finished pieces. So we've got these beads, we've got, I'm gonna grab a couple ball posts and a few jump rings. So these are just the bead landing jump rings and ball posts from Michaels. And then these are eye pins. I'm gonna grab a few eye pins, just one. This one already has an eye pin. And then we're gonna need all of our different kinds of pliers. All right. So we want this to be our shape. So this is what I'm gonna do first. I'm gonna connect these pieces with jump rings. So in order to open this jump ring correctly, I'm gonna take one pair of pliers and hold the jump ring. And then I'm gonna take a second pair of pliers, and instead of opening it this way, we're gonna open it this way. So like opening it towards you and away from you. So moving one pair of pliers towards you, the other away from you, to avoid, you know, stressing the metal and warping it. So we're just gonna open this jump ring, and then we're gonna just slip it through. We made this hole before baking, and then we're going to connect it with this piece. So these two pieces are connected now, and I'm going to just close the jump ring in the same way that I opened it. So now our jump ring is closed. We've got a secure connection of these two pieces. Now we're going to do the same thing with the other one. Now these jump rings are actually a little bit small. I prefer to use 7mm or 8mm jump rings in general, but you know, 6mm works as well with this project. And then we're gonna just kind of close it. All right, so that's the easy part. All right, so now we want these beads to just kind of be connected on top here. So we're gonna take an eye pin, which is just one of these pins that has a loop on the end, and thread it through the bead. And then we need to make a loop on top, as well as there's one on the bottom. We need to make one on top. So I'm gonna take my finger and just fold the eye pin over so that there's a 90-degree angle there. You can, I don't know how well it shows up on the camera, but the eye pin is bent over at a 90-degree angle to the bead. And then I'm going to take my clippers and I'm going to just clip kind of halfway down so that there's enough wire left to make a loop. I'm going to clip those. And then I'm going to take these round nose pliers. So these are the ones where, you know, they're the whole pliers kind of like round. And we're going to start at the end. We're going to grab the end of this wire, and then we're going to twist toward the body I'm going to twist this towards me until it makes a loop. So now we have a loop there. I don't know if you can see that. So there's a loop now on both ends of this bead. So the top one is where the post of the earring is going to go. So we're going to take the ball post, gotta leave a little bit of space there for the ball post to go. And we're going to thread it through that loop. And then we have to close this space so that the ball post stays on. We're going to use these and just gently close the loop. All right, so now we have the ball post attached to the bead. And we're going to use another jump ring. Just to attach this bead to the rest of the earring. Putting the jump ring through the loop on that eye pin. And just closing it like that. So there's one. Now I've got to do the other one.
We had some people asking if these earrings would be available on your Etsy to buy.
I was not planning on making more of these exact ones, but I do make a ton of different beaded styles. So it's been one of my favorite things recently to make beads with polymer clay, and making beads that look like different types of materials, like making beads out of polymer clay that look like they're made out of glass, for instance. So I do have a lot of those type of styles available on my website. Not currently, but I do sort of like limited restock drops every so often. So yeah, you can go onto my website and my Instagram account also. I post updates about when I'm going to be doing those drops. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So now doing the same thing with the other bead, just bending this eye pin at a 90-degree angle. I'm going to cut that. Now making this loop with the round nose pliers. And then closing the loop. And then using a jump ring to connect these. And I like this project. One of the reasons I like it and it's so much fun is because you really can do these in any sort of color or pattern. You can use any different type of bead that you want. So, you don't have to use glass beads. Michaels has a ton of different types of beads and different materials. They've got wood beads. They have a lot of semi-precious stones and things like that. So I really like the look of these glass beads. And I thought they, paired well with like the earthiness of the terrazzo. So this is what the finished pair looks like. And yeah, the terrazzo also you can do in any different color. You can mix up the shapes. Like I said, there's such a huge range of different types of shape cutters. And yeah, just have fun with it. And kind of go crazy. There's so many possibilities. So yeah, if there are any questions about anything that I didn't cover, or if anyone wants clarification on any of that.
I think that's a great stopping point. I just want to remind everyone that this class was recorded and it will be available tomorrow to watch at michaels.com/classes. And we were so happy to have this class today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and if anyone does think of any questions or have any follow-up, any questions or anything, feel free to reach out. My contact information was posted in the chat, so you can go to my website or my Instagram account, send me a message. So yeah, thank you guys for watching.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, have a good day.